their parents' house when their parents were settled and sort of set up. And it's that they don't recall the other houses that the parents bought, the one that was out in the unfashionable suburb, the one that was a doer-upper, the one that didn't have a garden. And so, it's sort of working your way up that property ladder, and they kind of want to go in many cases, and say, well, I want a nice central house in Auckland, and I want a garden, and I'd like a bit of a view as well. And it's like, well, that is just probably not going to be your first house unless you're Sam Morgan, basically. So
I think there's a lot of people.
Of
I think there's a lot of people, though, that obviously know they can't have the villa in Mount Eden, but are also struggling to get on at the very bottom of the ladder. The one-bedroomed studio apartments are costing $500,000, and they're the ones, out in Avondale. So I would challenge the view that people are just have their expectations too high. Very quickly they lower their expectations, and even just getting onto the ladder is costing them 7, 8, 9, 10 times income, and saving the deposit now that the Reserve Bank has changed the rules on loan-to-value ratio restrictions makes that even harder. And there are good reasons why they're grumpy, I think.
Interest was 21.5% when we first bought a house, says the texter. The real outrage here is people calling their avocados smashed. What's wrong with the old-fashioned mashed?
Well, can I say that the only good avocado is one that has been completely smashed? For me, it is demon slime fruit. I cannot believe people pay money for that thing. It is horrible.
I'm stealing that demon slime fruit.
Yeah, that's right. Please delete that previous opinion. Now, one thing before we go, and Footrot Flats creator Murray Ball, who has died at age 78 from Alzheimer's. A lot of tributes already, of course. Any thoughts from the two of you?
This is tremendously sad. I grew up on those cartoons, and I even was so proud to see my daughter fall in love with them as well, 14-year-old, and then she turned it into her own world on Minecraft and got me to come and play with her. I was Wal, she was the dog in Raupo on Minecraft. Oh, that's cool. And I'm incredibly proud of that and very sad to hear of Murray Ball's passing.
Yeah, I'm also very sad as well, and also quite in awe of the Minecraft story, because I can't match that. But for me, I came to New Zealand when I was 6 from Scotland, and so and went and lived in Christchurch, and so the Footrot Flat books were introducing me to a side of New Zealand that at the time I hadn't seen, that rural side, that very independent, that very rugged, very charismatic side of New Zealand. And dog was always my favourite. I think everyone was going to say dog was their favourite. But it was a real eye opener, and I spent more time in the countryside since then, and it's like, that was a good introduction to New Zealand.
R.I.P. Murray Ball.
Absolutely.
I grew up on a dairy farm, and it felt like exactly like my life.
Oh, that's nice. That's nicely put. Another writer's died at the same age, more or less, Robert James Waller, who wrote Bridges of Madison County. Hugely popular, 50 million copies sold. The author derided mercilessly. What would you sooner have, the money in the bank or the admiration of the critics?
It'd be nice to have both. And his novel is way better than the 50 Shades thing, which is the modern day version of it.
Yes, it is the modern. Well, yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, in terms of being denigrated by critics, it's the modern day version. Neil?
Ching ching for me.
Ching ching.
Take the money.
Neil Miller and Bernard Hickey on the panel. Thank you both very much.
Cheers.
And we're back tomorrow with Brian Edwards and Michelle Bogue. Checkpoint with John Campbell. Thanks, everyone. Checkpoint coming right up.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight we are live in Wellington straight after the news as the fallout from the Wellington College Facebook post sees hundreds of people gathered outside Parliament to protest against what they're calling a pervasive rape culture in this country. West Auckland residents demand answers after finding themselves waist deep in water for the second time in 5 years. The fecal and fiscal cost of Auckland's stormwater and wastewater systems. We're talking to 2 bosses, including the Mayor, about what needs to happen in our largest city. Plus, National Dangles a tax carrot, and junior doctors finally do a deal, and a Christchurch dairy owner who's been robbed, 8 times in 7 months. He spent 26 grand on a safe room, and it's still happening. Busy Checkpoint after the news.
RNZ News at 5. No mai, haere mai. Good afternoon. I'm Paul Brennan. Aucklanders hit by yesterday's massive flash floods are demanding answers from the council about why drains could not cope. Hundreds of people in western suburbs have been cleaning up their sodden homes today. Local contractor Brendan O'Hanlon says it's a disgrace drainage in the area isn't up to scratch or well enough maintained to prevent flooding. So far there have been no response from the council. The Hauraki District Council says the decision to go ahead with a festival near Waihi on Friday put people's lives at risk. About 200 people at the Sundays Festival were evacuated after the banks of the river behind the event split on Friday night. The council's chief executive Langley Cavers says it would have been better to cancel the festival given the weather warnings.
There was potential for a threat to human safety as a result of the wet weather and the flooding that occurred. I've had reports the water was going through cars and vans and the like, and it doesn't take much water in the middle of the night to propose a reasonable risk.
Hauraki District Council Chief Executive Langley Cavers. District Health Board say they agreed to a deal with junior doctors to prevent further damaging strikes in hospitals. The Resident Doctors Association said today junior doctors have voted overwhelmingly to accept the deal with DHBs over rosters and pay. The deal, aimed at providing safer rosters for doctors, follows a 48-hour strike in October and a 73-hour strike in January. The DHB's lead chief executive for Workforce and Employment Relations, Julie Patterson, says there were other solutions to dealing with fatigue.
However, the union thinks that this is going to help that, so of course we need now the 12 months of peace to work through those health and safety claims and get those new rosters in place and importantly get the remuneration review underway.
Julie Patterson there. Under the deal, the remuneration review will take place by June before the new employment contract expires in February. The egg industry is scrambling to protect its reputation after claims some free-range eggs sold at Countdown supermarkets were in fact cage-laid. An investigation by the new website Newsroom has concluded that millions of Palace poultry eggs sold at Countdown stores before this year were likely to have been falsely marketed as free-range. Catherine Hutton reports.
Countdown has now removed the eggs from their shelves, and rival chain Foodstuff says it doesn't stock the brand. The Serious Fraud Office is now investigating, and Palace Poultry has declined to comment. Michael Brooks, who heads the Egg Producers Federation, says the investigation is into only one operator of the 126 commercial egg farms in New Zealand, and he's confident this isn't an industry-wide issue. Mr Brooks says the industry doesn't tolerate anyone making misleading claims, and efforts to introduce egg stamping are well advanced.
So that's where inkjet stamping on eggs is undertaken, identifies the farm, identifies the production type. It's important, however, that that's done on the farm itself, not at the point of packing.
Mr Brooks says the cost of egg stamping is an issue, particularly for smaller producers. The Ministry for Primary Industries says it's aware of the investigation and is monitoring the situation. This is Catherine Hutton.
Hundreds of people have gathered on the lawn outside Parliament to protest against rape culture and encourage more thorough education in secondary schools. The rally was organised after two Wellington College boys posted messages boasting on Facebook about having sex with drunk and unconscious girls. Poor weather in the capital didn't keep people at bay, with men and women of all ages, including at least 100 secondary school students, turning out. One of the protesters, Jenny Stone, says in this day and age, women feeling unsafe because of their gender is simply unacceptable.
Well, I grew up through the women's movement and I would have expected that my granddaughters would be able to feel safe by now, and it doesn't seem as though they can. I would hope also that my grandsons would have learned a lot, and I'm hoping that they have. I think they have.
Jenny Stone. Differences have opened up among political parties over tax. National continues to hint at tax cuts while Labour's pledging no change. Our economics correspondent Patrick O'Mara reports.
The prospect of rising budget surpluses has tax back in the spotlight. The Prime Minister, Bill English, reiterated tax cuts are on the table, but he has other priorities too, such as putting more into health and education, roads and repaying debt. Labour says there'll be no tax changes now, But if elected, it will set up a working group to look at whether wealth-based taxes, such as a capital gains or land tax, are needed. The Green Party will release its tax policy later this year and says shifting the tax base to deal with climate change remains a centrepiece. ACT wants National to stop pussyfooting around and make tax cuts part of this year's budget. This is Patrick O'Mara.
It's 5:05. On to sport now. The All Black 7 coach, Scott Waldrum, has been left with a bitter taste in his mouth after another disappointing end to the latest World Series tournament in Vancouver. New Zealand only narrowly beat Argentina 17-14 to finish fifth and maintain fourth place overall in the championship. After going unbeaten in pool play, New Zealand stumbled in the quarterfinal, losing to eventual winners England, much to Waldrum's chagrin.
Really disappointing to sort of not put in a good performance against England and to see them in the final and us ended up having to play for 5th and 6th. So it's been a tough weekend and we've certainly shows we've got a lot to improve on.
Scott Waldrum there. The Black Caps batsman Colin Munro has been suspended from Auckland's upcoming Plunket Shield cricket match for using abusive language. A statement from New Zealand Cricket says Munro was suspended at a code of conduct hearing after using inappropriate language in the match against Canterbury. The statement doesn't say whether Munro directed the abuse towards an umpire or an opposition player. The New Zealand rally driver Hayden Paddon in his Hyundai has finished 5th in the latest round of the World Rally Championships in Mexico. He sits 9th overall in the Drivers' Championship. Meanwhile, New Zealand's Scott Dixon has finished 3rd at the season-opening IndyCar race in Florida. And that's the news.
A cartoon legend is remembered.
Let's ransack all your scripts, Murray. There's fantastic gags in there, and we'll just litter the movie with the stuff you've already written. It'll be really, really easy.
Will taxes be cut?
We're not putting forward tax cuts as some kind of sugar shot.
Or won't they?
The slow strip tease from Stephen Joyce and Bill English, sorry to give people that image over their cornflakes, means that we have to make sure we see what they do and factor that in.
Get dressed with Guy and Espiner and Susie Ferguson Morning Report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, Airbnb fronts up on bed taxes, disruption and whether it's a threat to rental stock. And after 10, Australian artist and filmmaker Lynette Walworth on exploring the power of storytelling in virtual reality. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. Now the short forecast from Met Service. This takes us through to midnight tomorrow, Tuesday. Northland, cloudy periods and isolated showers. Auckland to Kapiti Coast, that includes the central high country. Cloudy periods, a few showers, clearing from the south tomorrow. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Fine breaks, also a few showers. Possibly thundery about Gisborne and Hawke's Bay about now through until the evening. Waited Upper and Wellington, scattered showers. Buller, Nelson and Marlborough, scattered showers, possibly heavy about Nelson Ranges about now and this evening. Showers retreat to the Kaikoura coast in the morning. Westland and Fiordland, scattered rain, clearing from the south about now and into the evening, becoming fine. Canterbury, rain clears to isolated showers in the morning. Fine breaks develop inland. Otago and Southland, isolated showers, fine spells develop inland tomorrow and at the Chathams. Overcast with rain, they should ease to isolated showers in the morning. It is 8.5 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Paul. Flooding coming up. We're going to be looking at Auckland's water infrastructure. It's some length tonight, but let's begin in Wellington, where hundreds of people have gathered outside Parliament to protest against a rape culture which they say is pervasive across the country. The protest is in response, initially anyway, to online messages about rape and was prompted by those messages posted by 2 Wellington College students on Facebook last week, joking about raping intoxicated girls. Our reporter Michael Kropp is there live at the scene and joins us via live view. Michael, it looks like a pretty big turnout behind you. Have you any idea how many people are there?
It's a substantial turnout. Look, on Facebook they were estimating more than 400 people clicked attending, but it could be a little bit higher than that. I'm not great with numbers. Some people are saying as high as 1,000. I wouldn't quite put it that high, but everyone who is here is emphatic about why they're here. You might be able to hear a little bit of that cheering in the background, and I guess they describe themselves as proud protesters who are here to put a line in the sand and to say that every behaviour that constitutes rape culture, from joking about the normalisation of sexual violence to the actual committing of sexual violence. They are saying that every single one of those behaviours is harmful, that it's unacceptable and that it needs to be called out.
Who is there, Michael, and where are they from in broad terms?
Who is there? Well, we have students from many of the high schools in the area. It was initially expected just to be a few high schools, but I've encountered people from at least 5 or 6. We've got young women, young men. We've got MPs from almost every party. And the Deputy Prime Minister, Paula Bennett, also the Minister for Women, she spoke and she said that she commended the people here for their bravery, both the young men and the young women, saying that their voices were important and that those voices needed respect. We've also heard from Green MP Jan Logie, who shared messages about the harmful nature of sexual violence, and Grant Robertson, a Labour MP. I'm fairly certain he's the only male speaker. He was saying that we must always stand up against sexual violence, and that it's effectively those simple messages of no meaning no.
Michael, it's a raucous old crowd, and whoever's speaking at the moment is being very well received. But you've got someone standing beside you. Who have you got with you?
I've got Mia Fayumu here. Now, she's year 13 at Wellington East, and she's been involved since the beginning with organising this protest. So, Mia, why organise this? Why draw attention to this harmful culture?
We felt that lots of these comments are made constantly all the time, and we felt that there wasn't enough action being done, and what happened recently that was shown in the media, we felt like that was kind of a tipping point for us, and that we felt like it shouldn't continue, that we needed to actually make an action and bring more attention to it. And the turnout that we've seen today shows that lots of people agree with us and that there's a lot of support behind what we're doing. So, yeah.
What are some of the key messages that you really hope people take away today?
I hope people take away that joking about rape or normalising rape or any issue similar to this just isn't okay, and that it's very harmful to people and to victims, and we hope that people take away that this isn't an issue that should be normalised at all. And we also hope what we're calling for compulsory education on consent within high schools, and we hope that's something that leads to wider discussion and is more and that something from that happens. Yeah.
Fantastic. So we also heard from the Deputy Prime Minister Paula Bennett saying that we hear you when you're talking about perhaps there needs to be more education on healthy relationships, on consent, on sexual education. Do you hope that this means concrete changes to perhaps how this is taught at schools?
I mean, we can never tell, but I hope that it does, her saying that she hears us and we're having a lot of support from MPs and some of them talking, that we hope that means that there actually will be change and that we actually are being heard and we see some changes in the future happen.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mia. So tonight, this evening, we've also heard from people who are saying that they cannot believe that they are still protesting against this. Some of the signs in the crowd are along the lines of the simple no means no, but others have been a little bit more forthright in terms of saying instead of boys will be boys, but boys will, and then boys is crossed out saying will be held accountable for their consequences.
Michael Crop from a very noisy foreground at Parliament. So, roughly 500 people there. Estimates vary between 400 and 1,000, but it's a bigger turnout than many people had expected. Schools from across the region, a lot of adult support there. I noticed a couple of boys from Wellington College were also there. Compulsory education on consent is one of the concrete things being called for by organisers. Paula Bennett spoke to the people there and said she supported that. That live from Parliament. We'll go back there if the the protest continues for much longer. But let's turn now to the weekend's flooding, and we'll spare Samuel Taylor Coleridge, but Auckland did have water everywhere, and some of it most certainly isn't fit to drink. This was, of course, extraordinary rainfall. Downpours so heavy that at one stage 65 millimetres fell in a single hour. That won't happen often, of course, but flooding was repeated in some places, suggesting work needs to be done to better prepare those areas against such future events. And the city's stormwater and wastewater infrastructure is once again under scrutiny. Yes, the weekend was a big test of some ageing systems, but how much rain can Auckland cope with before it's too much? We start west of the CBD tonight, where homes and businesses were flooded, where whole roads were underwater at some stages, and where the rain even caused a sinkhole. Unusual, yes. But on one section of Great North Road in Glendine, they have seen it before, and only 5 years ago. The same drain overflowing, the same properties flooding as a result. Here's our reporter Zach Fleming and our camerawoman Claire Easton-Farrelly in Glendine.
Shivani and Gobind Juneja have lost everything. Inside their unit on Great North Road in the Auckland suburb of Glendine, the water was waist deep yesterday. Outside, their vehicles were underwater too, and they don't have insurance.
My car is also gone, my wife's scooter is gone, so it's very, very, very bad for us, you know. At the moment, we not afford to buy the new furniture, new car, new scooter, and all those stuff. Our all grocery is gone. Grocery, you know, the approximately, you know, the $1,000 grocery, our is gone.
The unit flooded because a stormwater drain at the back of the property was overwhelmed in yesterday's deluge. The couple was out when 65 millimetres of rain fell in just an hour. By the time they got home, it was too late to salvage anything. It also flooded 5 years ago, but the Junejas say nobody told them that before they moved in just 3 weeks ago.
No one guided to us. Nothing is guided to us. And at the moment, no one is responsible for this one also, you know.
They didn't inform. If they inform, why we stay here? Yeah. They didn't inform. They didn't warn this is a flood-affected area.
Gobind showed me a copy of the tenancy agreement for their two-bedroom unit. Again, no mention of it being flood-prone. The property is owned by the Wellpark Trust. Michael Page, the listed contact for the trust, refused to comment today, as did members of the trust. Directly across the road is L&V Furniture. It too was damaged in the 2012 flood caused by the same stormwater drain. Down from street level, the entire workshop was underwater yesterday, the raging torrent captured by co-owner Ivan Zhu. Ivan said it's caused around $100,000 worth of damage.
Can you see the water lines over there?
Yeah, it's about, what, like chest height, neck height maybe, yeah?
Yeah, that much, yeah.
So everything in your shop was completely...
Completely it's damaged, completely damaged. Yeah. You can see outside they already wrapped, it's a finished product, ready to go today. But now, this morning we just keep one by one to ring the customer, say sorry, we have to delay and I need to order the material again.
Auckland Council's confirmed the stormwater drain is a known hotspot for blockages and is therefore cleared fortnightly and before forecast bad weather. It was cleared on Friday. Ivan does have insurance, but like the Junejas, he's angry. He wants Auckland Council to take responsibility.
We hopefully can, 2 or 3 weeks, a few weeks can recover, but hard to say. It's not only by ourselves. Just like you say, insurance company or council or the property owner or each part. Yeah.
And how many staff do you have?
Now around 25 persons work in here.
And so what happens to those 25 staff over those next couple of weeks?
No idea now. So, but hopefully everyone, that's why we need to quick to recovery, to keep everyone's job in here, keep the business and keep everyone safety. Yeah, that's really important.
The Junejas have 1 night left of their emergency accommodation.
They arrange for 2 days, 2 nights. After that, we don't know where we can stay. Yeah.
For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
So in short, the rainfall was sometimes so great the stormwater system simply couldn't drain it fast enough. We've seen this problem in South Dunedin too, but in Auckland it extends through suburb after suburb, particularly in older parts of the city where the stormwater infrastructure is so old, dated and sometimes combined with wastewater in a free-for-all after heavy rain. That needs fixing, says Infrastructure New Zealand CEO Stephen Selwood, who doesn't accept this is new or a one-off event.
No, the reality is there's decades of investment required, and this goes back a really long time, and unfortunately things can't be fixed overnight, which is the legacy we now face. But, you know, when you get unprecedented rainfall like we had over the weekend, it just blows all the systems apart, and that, you know, you can see the clear evidence of that. But the reality is, even on a, you know, kind of normal basis, we've got combined stormwater and wastewater systems. When the stormwater overflows, they basically overflow into one another, which means you end up with wastewater in the stormwater system. That was the way it was designed, you know, way back in the day when Auckland was going to only have 1 million population. We're now 1.5 million, and it's still the same system. So, you know, that's the system as we have it, and we need to improve it and upgrade it.
You talk about this being a legacy issue. How much money needs to be spent to get Auckland to the level it ought to be at?
Oh, look, it is in the billions. I recall a report back in a decade ago that was then talking of $8 billion investment over a 30-year time frame. That was just in the stormwater system. And then, of course, the wastewater and drinking water systems need to be invested as well.
Do you think people realise how bad it is? Do you think people realise how often, for example, wastewater is entering stormwater systems? And by wastewater, we're talking about what happens when you flush the toilet, right? That is entering stormwater systems and is going straight out into the harbour. And how often stormwater is blocking up our wastewater treatment plants?
Look, I don't think people generally understand, you know, the needs of infrastructure full stop until it fails. And, you know, the experiences in the weekend is exactly the underlying kind of message to people. But look, you know, one of the ways you treat wastewater is by dilution. So the theory way back in the old days was, you know, if you combine the two, you'll end up with so much diluted wastewater it won't be a problem. And of course, we're not talking just sewage from toilets. You know, it's poor quality water, but not necessarily, you know, raw effluent that we're talking about. But nevertheless, you know, in today's modern society, that's just simply unacceptable, and we need to act on it.
And to act on it realistically, how much money is going to have to be spent? Ballpark figure, obviously.
Oh, look, I would, you know, we're talking sort of 15, 20 billion over a 30-year period. It's a big number. And immediately within the next decade, I know that Watercare have in excess of $5 billion worth of capital works planned. And of course, the other thing is, it's not only a money issue, it's getting consents for the work to be done. For example, Watercare have a proposal for a new treatment plant out west in Oratia. They originally had consents in a forestry area that was now withdrawn by the planning hearings process, and so they're in consultation with the local community. And these sorts of processes can take months, if not years, to resolve. And all of that's adding to the pressure.
So that's the bigger picture from Stephen Selwood, who's the head of Infrastructure New Zealand. Very kindly standing by and listening to all of this as it goes to air is Dean Kimpton, who is the COO, the Chief Operating Officer of Auckland Council. He's going to join us shortly, but let's go from the macro to the micro, although the Mangere wastewater treatment plant is hardly micro. It's New Zealand's largest such plant, and according to Watercare's own website, and I quote, serves more than 1 million people who live from Mangarewa in the south, of course, to Ponsonby, and as far west as Glen Eden and Titirangi. It functions highly successfully up to certain inflow levels, there's no doubt about that, but Gemma Tolich-Allen, a wastewater biologist who's scientific advisor to the Manukau Harbour Restoration Society, says those inflow levels are breached surprisingly often. So, is the wastewater system coping as often as Auckland might hope?
No, not in Auckland, not at Manukau Harbour for the Mangere wastewater treatment plant.
Which is the biggest water treatment plant in New Zealand, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, it's not coping with even smaller events such as what we've seen over the weekend, so certainly not for this weekend. I don't know what the flow into the treatment plant would be over these last few days, but I would say that at times it was probably in excess of 16 cubic metres per second, which is the sort of maximum flow that the plant can deal with even in a form of primary treatment. So you'd have to get those figures from them, but no, anything above 9 cubic metres per second is subject to certain amounts of bypass in terms of treatment. So
okay. So forgive me for interrupting, but this is both quite detailed but also fascinating. So it can cope. Mangere can cope, and it's New Zealand's biggest wastewater treatment plant. It can cope with 9 cubic litres a second.
For full treatment, yes.
For full treatment. How often a year, in a typical kind of year, does it get more than 9 litres per second?
Around 20 to 22 events per year.
And an event is what? Is that what? 1 minute, 1 day, 1 hour? What is that?
An event, Watercare terms an event any period of sustained bypass. So that could be as short as, say, 2 to 3 hours, or it could go as long as sort of 30, 35 hours. So it can cover more than 1 day.
Right, and that's happening 20 to 22 times a year?
Yes, yeah.
And so the wastewater treatment plant that deals with the most wastewater in Auckland is stretched beyond its manageable capacity roughly almost once a fortnight.
Well, yes, you can get, for example, in the winter period, you could get sort of like 8 events in 2 months. Yeah, it's definitely feasible. For example, in June 2015, from June to August 2015, which was a 3-month period, we have figures supplied to us from Watercare that show that there were 6 primary bypasses. That means that the solid component in the flow coming into the treatment plant, which includes all the fecal matter, wasn't settled for 6 events over that period, and some of them were as large as over 140 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Some of that stuff that has not been settled with fecal matter will go into another form of treatment, but there's some component of it that can't even be treated in that form.
And then it goes out, and then it goes out to sea.
Yeah, it goes out through onto the Manukau Harbour.
Auckland is, of course, called the City of Sails, and yes, we all understand that what we saw over the weekend was an extraordinary event. I drove in it on Friday night, and I've never seen anything like it in my 53 years on the planet.
Is that right?
Oh, it was unbelievable.
We were out of town, so I didn't see it.
It was unbelievable. But you are suggesting to me that actually this is happening 20 to 22 times a year, and on some of those occasions, we're not even managing to treat the solids.
No, I think what you have to probably ask Watercare for this event, did the flow into the treatment plant go above 16.5 cubic metres per second? Because if it did, it's not even screened. At that stage, anything above 16.5 cubic metres per second is too high for the screens. So you'll have to see. They won't be able to give you figures probably immediately, but over the coming weeks, you'll be able to work out just the volume of waste that has gone into the Manukau over this event, and I think it will just absolutely shock Auckland.
That's Gemma Tolich-Allen, who is a wastewater biologist. Joining us now on the phone is Dean Kimpton, who is Auckland Council's Chief Operating Officer. Dean, you have been sitting there very kindly and patiently listening to all of that, but it's wonderful that you heard it, and we appreciate both your time now and over the preceding 10 or 12 minutes. What do you make of what all these people are saying? In other words, is this situation broadly satisfactory?
Look, thanks, John, for the opportunity to share some of my take on what's been said. But look, first of all, if I can just make sure that your listeners understand that the council family is really concerned for those that have been affected at a personal and a property level. And
okay, so these are the people we met in Glendine, right?
Yep, that's exactly right. But they're not just in Glendine, they're on Waiheke, they're out
absolutely.
in the south, across Auckland. So and we've got a range of things that we want to do to support them, and if we've got time, we can talk about that.
Okay, well, let's talk about the meaningful ones. Yep. Are you going to provide them with some form of insurance or compensation for lost property?
So, look, our commitment at this stage is to provide ongoing accommodation support for those families that have been displaced, for example, at Cartwright and Cartwright Street, and to work with them until they find suitable alternative accommodation.
If you have drains flooding in identical circumstances only 5 years apart, shouldn't people who are renting there, putting their property there, their lives there, everything they own there, be told that?
So look, there's two things. One is we provide information on Council's planning maps that's available to any inquirer and property owner as to what areas of Auckland are flood prone. And that's a very important job for us to make sure that information is as accurate as we can get it so people can make informed decisions. But I also encourage people like the tenants of those properties, if you talk to, they need to discuss this matter with their landlord as well and work with the property owner to ensure that both their personal well-being and their property is protected.
Yeah, look, absolutely. In the best possible world, that would happen. But we know there is a housing crisis in Auckland. People are queuing up to get access to flats. The moment you start discussing with your landlord whether or not the house is previously flooded and whether or not they're going to cover you for insurance in such circumstances, you're not going to get the property, are you? I mean, really? Isn't that naive?
Oh, look, it's not naive, but what you've highlighted is the challenge that Auckland has. Maybe just to talk about some of the things that we are doing to help alleviate these. So quite rightly, one of your reporters reflected the fact that in these areas we inspect, and there's a couple of hundred hotspots across Auckland, we inspect these locations fortnightly. I've been able to confirm that...
But the inspection, yeah, absolutely, you do that, and that's on the record, and I'm sure that makes a difference. But the fact of the matter is that what we are seeing, and everyone we have spoken to in the program tonight about this speaks to this, is an ageing and inadequate infrastructure, and when the rain is heavy in Auckland, the stormwater cannot clear the water fast enough in a growing number of areas.
So yes, we do have that problem in some areas, and you've seen it occur under very intense rainfall conditions over the last 3 days. We had 3 significant weather events back on back, and the surrounding area had no chance to respond. So I agree. But look, what I can assure you, and it's public information, we have doubled the spend on stormwater maintenance or stormwater renewals. So that's getting in and sorting out some of these pipes that are undersized. For example, the Cartwright one was just recently upgraded in 2012. Part of the problem there is that we are balancing safety of kids getting caught in these pipes, and so we put a grill on them. Well, the grill catches the debris stops the water flowing through, and before you know it, we have an issue like this under severe events. So,
look, I know that this is extremely expensive, and I know that there is real pressure on money in Auckland.
Yep.
But money needs to be spent on this infrastructure, doesn't it? And are you lobbying for that? Is the council listening? Is anyone talking about it? And will this be done?
So there's significant conversation within council at the political level and staff level around the investment required and the needs. And we think about risk across Auckland and where to best focus that investment. You will be familiar with the canopy program or the central interceptor pipe.
Absolutely, which is going to cost, what, a billion, just over $1 billion?
So these are massive investments, and they have an impact on all of Auckland, including our beach water quality, and we understand those relationships. So look, that's right there. You will see that occurring in our annual budget and long-term plan discussions right now.
Is enough being done on the pipe infrastructure? I guess that's the key point, isn't it? This is a city that is growing at, a rate of 40,000 people a year. A lot of this infrastructure, that's not true. Some of this infrastructure is a century old. What was the population of Auckland then? What, a seventh, an eighth, a ninth of what it is now? Do you have the infrastructure you need to make this work?
Do we have the infrastructure needed to make this work? In some areas, the older parts of the city, we know that we need to do further investment, and that is where a lot of the renewals work is going. And we're trying to do that where we have the greatest risk and do it in a fashion that the ratepayer of Auckland can afford, because the ratepayer in Auckland, there is no open checkbook.
Dean Kimpton, who is the Auckland Council Chief Operating Officer. Dean, thank you for joining us, and thank you for waiting through those stories while we were bringing all of that to air. We would love your feedback on this. You can text us on 2101, email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, or contact us via Twitter or Facebook. It's 5:30 on RNZ, give or take 3.5 minutes. Coming up on the program, National dangles the tax carrot. Junior doctors finally do a deal, but not everyone is happy about it. And a dairy owner spends tens of thousands of dollars on a safe room to protect staff after 8 robberies in 7 months. All of that before 6 o'clock. But before any of it, Paul Brennan with RNZ Headlines.
Thank you, John. In our headlines, hundreds of people have gathered on the lawn outside Parliament to protest against rape culture and encourage more thorough education in secondary school. The rally was organised after 2 Wellington College boys posted messages boasting on Facebook about having sex with drunk and unconscious girls. One of the protesters, Jenny Stone, says in this day and age, women feeling unsafe because of their gender is simply unacceptable. The police say they were shot at during a car chase in South Auckland this afternoon after a robbery at a dairy in which 3 men fled with the till. Officers spotted their getaway car in Manurewa but abandoned the chase when a shot was fired at a patrol car. The Police Eagle helicopter found the car and 3 men aged 21, 26 and 29. They've been arrested. The police say no one was hurt. Aucklanders hit by yesterday's massive flash floods are demanding answers from the council about why drains could not cope. Hundreds of people in western suburbs have been clearing up their sodden homes today. Local contractor Brendan O'Hanlon says it's a disgrace. Drainage in the area isn't up to scratch or well enough maintained to prevent flooding. The Hauraki District Council says the decision to go ahead with a festival near Waihi on Friday put people's lives at risk. About 200 people at the Sundays Festival were evacuated after the banks of the river behind the event split on Friday night. District Health Boards say they agreed to a deal with junior doctors to prevent further damaging strikes in hospitals. The Resident Doctors Association said today junior doctors have voted overwhelmingly to accept the deal with DHBs over rosters and pay. And the egg industry is scrambling to protect its reputation after claims some free-range eggs sold at Countdown supermarkets were in fact cage-laid. An investigation by the new website Newsroom has concluded that millions of Palace poultry eggs sold at Countdown stores before this year were likely to have been falsely marketed as free-range. Those are the headlines. Our next news update will be at 6.
Thank you very much. For business coming up, but first, voters will have some clear choices on tax when they go to the polls in 6 months' time. The general election, of course. National is continuing to dangle the prospect of tax cuts amid rising budget surpluses. Labor's now pledged not to raise taxes to fund its election promises, while its partner in waiting, the Greens, is signalling carbon charges. Looking at all of this, here is our economics correspondent, Patrick O'Mara.
The prospect of rising budget surpluses to about $8.5 billion by 2021 has tax back in the spotlight. The Prime Minister, Bill English, today gave his strongest hint that tax cuts could come as early as next year.
Most measures that you bring in to do with household incomes would follow the usual cycle, which is if they're announced this year, they'd start 1st of April next year.
But he's not making any promises just yet, indicating he'd like to spread the fiscal love by putting more into health and education services, more roads and other infrastructure, as well as repaying debt.
People won't want to see surpluses used just on one thing when we've got this range of needs to meet.
Labor's leader Andrew Little said at the weekend he's not planning any tax increases if elected, as his party can pay for all its election year promises from current tax revenue. But Labor has already flagged it will extend the government's bright line test on investors selling houses for a profit from 2 years to 5 years. Its finance spokesperson Grant Robertson criticised the government for dangling the tax cut carrot when he says tens of thousands of people are homeless and basic public services have been deliberately underfunded.
We've got a plan to be able to reinvest in health and in education and in housing. We've made very clear they're our priorities. We've forecast how we're going to spend on those.
Mr Robertson says if Labor forms the next government, it will set up a working group to look at the tax mix, including whether wealth-based taxes such as a capital gains or land tax are needed. That will be presented to voters at the 2020 election. Its potential coalition partner, the Green Party, won't be waiting. It will release its tax policy later this year, but co-leader James Shaw says shifting the tax base to deal with climate change remains a centrepiece.
At the last election, we went in with a promise to reduce income taxes for 97% of people. The revenue from that would have come from a charge on carbon emissions. So this year's tax package will be roughly in line with last year's, but there will be some changes.
Mr Shaw says the Greens' differences with Labor won't affect its working relationship, with the final shape of their tax policy likely to depend on the relative size of each party in Parliament. Building up acts, presence to influence National on issues like tax, is top of mind for its leader and sole MP, David Seymour. He wants National to stop pussyfooting around and commit to making tax cuts part of this year's budget to help heavily indebted households facing the prospect of rising interest rates.
all very well to talk about the government's financial situation, but what about households' financial situation? We've had no tax release for 7 years, going on 8 now. It's time for the government to actually look after the people that pay the bill.
The leader of New Zealand First, Winston Peters, did not return calls. However, the party's written policy says people and businesses who benefit from the higher incomes should bear a greater portion of the tax burden than those with lower incomes. For Checkpoint, Patrick O'Mara.
We would love your feedback on that subject too, but let's turn to business now with Jonathan Mitchell, who is beaming in live from Wellington. Hi, Jonathan. Tonight, a snapshot of how the regions are performing. What is the snapshot and who's it put on top?
Well, we've put forward a report tonight by ASB Bank. They've looked at 16 regional economies around the country in the December quarter. And yes, Nelson and Tasman come out on top of this report. That's because of the region's strong horticulture, wine, tourism and construction sectors. So that's quite broad-based. Tourism and construction isn't just confined to the top of the south, it's everywhere. Some regions are doing better than others at it. The report has highlighted some sort of weakness coming through for Auckland in the construction sector. That's essentially based around capacity constraints. The report is saying that Auckland can't keep pace with the growth that's required, so that's coming through in the survey. But looking at a more broad level, looking at the housing market, it came up today in the Real Estate Institute figures for February, which was slightly higher. It also came up in this ASB report. Those heavy restrictions that came into force by the Reserve Bank last year, cracking down on those investors' property, they come through in this survey and certainly biting into demand.
Some areas doing it a bit tough after the Kokoda quake, obviously.
New Wellington and Marlborough fell 6 points and 6 places respectively in this ASB report. That's essentially around, as you say, the earthquake. But ASB points out that this is likely to be short-lived because there is a rebuild effort going on. And elsewhere in the report, at the bottom spot in 16th spot was Southland, and that reflects their retail and construction sectors really not keeping pace with the rest of the country. But they have pointed out there are some buffers for the Deep South, such as the dairy sector, expecting a higher payout for this season, and also tourism, which is quite widespread around the country. But Southland, especially coming into winter, expected to benefit from tourism.
Jonathan, so that's the regions. Let's look at the broader economy, because economic growth data is due out when?
We've got the fourth quarter numbers on Thursday, likely to show an annual rate at around 3%, 0.7 for the quarter. There's a bit of mixed figures out there, but 0.7 is really where it's sitting at the moment. The Institute of Economic Research has put out some numbers today, some consensus forecasts about economic growth. It's likely to sit at around 3% for the next few years, but edge down to 2.5% by around 2020. But when we look at inflation, the key measure that the Reserve Bank keeps an eye on, staying relatively the same for those expectations, likely to get back into the Reserve Bank's 2% midpoint by 2019, the middle of 2019. So overall, we've had quite a lot of numbers out today, painting the economy in quite a good spotlight. Some pressures out there, but certainly top of the south is basking in this spotlight tonight.
Thanks, Jonathan. What do the markets do today?
Well, the top 50 index followed Wall Street's lead and made some gains. It was up 17 points to finish at 7195, and the dollar just holding off for those GDP numbers on Thursday. And of course the Federal Reserve still under 70, currently trading at 69.3 US cents and 91.6 Australian.
Jonathan Mitchell, we'll talk to you tomorrow night. Cheers, Jonathan. A Christchurch franchisee says he spent $26,000 putting a safe room and a cigarette dispensing machine in his night and day store to keep his staff safe after 8 robberies in 7 months. Ballston store owner David Lee told me the store was his livelihood, but it's become a target. The most recent robbery just last Wednesday. It's incredible really. 8 times in 7 months.
Unbelievable, isn't it? Yeah.
It's utterly unbelievable. And what sort of robberies are they? What sort of weapons are they using?
Well, we had a couple of firearms, but mainly it's like a hammer or a iron bar or something, just as threatening, yeah.
Which is terrifying for your staff.
It it is very terrifying for them.
And so, have you had some staff members robbed more than once now?
Luckily, it's been sort of spread. One guy's copped it a couple of times, but it's sort of been spread over quite a few staff.
And do they just want cash or do they want cigarettes? What do they want?
Well, cash and cigarettes. That's the only things they take.
And tell me about the last one.
Well, the last one, as they say, we have the door shut at night, so they actually looks like they sent someone in first who wanted around the shop and didn't get anything, but as he was leaving, these two people rushed in.
Oh, right. So as he was leaving, he triggered the door to open to let him out.
Yeah. So, I mean, I haven't heard that from the police, but that's what happened, yeah.
You got the security camera footage of that, have you?
Yeah.
So what can you do about this, David?
Well, we're working. I just see the two policemen here going to go have some health and safety issues with me, and the franchisor is working hard. We're all working hard to try to solve the situation. We've spent about $26,000 on putting like a safe room, a cigarette dispensing machine, upgrade the security cameras, and we're seeing what else we can do. So, but other than that, I think whatever we're going to do, they're just going to find a different way if they want to come in. So,
You spent $26,000 trying to stop this happening.
So far, yes.
And it just keeps happening.
Yep.
So, do you think of actually walking away from the business?
No, I don't want them to beat me, John. I'm here. I've spent a lot of money on goodwill on this business, and and I've got a family to support. So, no, that's not an option.
So this is your livelihood. This is it. This is
the only business I got. This is my only income. I'm a mortgage and a family like everybody else. So and I do 60 hours a week plus here. So
you just actually need them to stop, don't you?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Really good. Because in the end, it probably will affect the business. Yeah.
And also, I suspect it's really bumming the community out, isn't it? I mean, there's a sense really
We've had so much, especially from the local community, we've had so much support. We had a school send us a whole lot of cards that their children are drawn for us, and we've had boxes of chocolates and biscuits and all sorts of things dropped into us, especially from our local people and things. So,
David Lee from the Woolston Night and Day robbed 8 times in 7 months, but the local community rather wonderfully standing by him. A police officer seriously injured in a house siege near Kawerau a year ago has recalled being shot but has no recollection of seeing who shot him. 28-year-old Reese Warren is on trial in the High Court in Hamilton, facing a number of charges, including 2 of attempted murder. 4 police officers were wounded in the incident. Our reporter Andrew McRae has been at the court today. He's covering the trial and he joins us now via live view. Andrew, what's happened today? What have you learnt?
Good evening, John. Well, today we started with hearing more evidence from an AOS officer who was in the house. He wasn't injured, but he was right there at the forefront of the AOS job to go in and clear the house out. And he talked about the shot, hearing a really loud bang, and then seeing one constable, Constable Regan Mulhaney, fall to the floor like a giant totara falling to the ground. He basically fell unsupported, and that was after a very loud shot had gone off. And then under covering fire, we heard that Constable Martin Rowe moved into the hallway of the house and helped drag his colleague out to safety, while the other AOS officers, 5 other officers in the house, were sending off a lot of covering fire to protect Constable Rowe as he took Constable Mulhaney out of the house. So a very, very brave actions on part of that officer.
And Andrew, look, can you clarify this for me? The most seriously injured person was giving evidence today, right?
That's right.
And so how are his injuries
Constable
now?
Regan Mulhaney. Well, looking at him, he looks fine. He's back at work. He's now based in Dunedin. He was in Rotorua when the event happened. It was a year ago. He was airlifted from the scene to hospital. First to Rotorua Hospital, then to Waikato here in Hamilton, where he had surgery, and then was sent to 9 days in hospital here. Then he was sent to rehabilitation in Auckland, and he said right throughout the period of rehabilitation, throughout every day, bits of fragments of bullet fragments and little bits of metal were coming out of his cheek and his lips and his arms and his chest. So he really suffered, and he had a skull fracture as well. So he has recovered remarkably well, considering it was just over 12 months ago when the incident happened near Kararao.
Andrew McRae, who is in the court for us in Hamilton and will be covering the trial throughout. 28-year-old Rhys Warren on trial in the High Court in Hamilton, facing a number of charges, including 2 of attempted murder. You're with Checkpoint. The time is 11 minutes to 6. Thank you for being with us. Egg producers say they're extremely disappointed at reports one supplier has been selling caged eggs labelled as free range, but they're adamant it isn't an industry-wide problem. An investigation by the Newsroom website has concluded that millions of Palace poultry eggs sold at Countdown stores before this year were likely to have been falsely marketed as free range. Countdown has now removed the eggs from its shelves, and the Serious Fraud Office is investigating. Michael Brooks, who heads the Egg Producers Association or Federation, insisted it's an isolated incident, but he told our reporter Catherine Hutton the industry was always looking at ways it can improve.
As an industry, we've been looking at a couple of options. Genetic fingerprinting was one, but the one that as an industry that we have progressed with is egg stamping. So that's where inkjet stamping on eggs is undertaken, identifies the farm, identifies the production type. It's important, however, that that's done on the farm itself, not at the point of packing, at the pack house at the farm. We had a discussion at our last board meeting. I was instructed by the board to continue to pursue the work on that, and we're well advanced on looking at all the details. It can be costly, the machinery can be very costly, but we think overall that would be another way of ensuring that consumers continue to have confidence in the product they're being supplied.
Where is that proposal at now?
So it's a case of looking at the cost structures, how that would apply to smaller operators. For a smaller operator, the only sensible option, a realistic option, may be hand stamping. So we're working through those issues, seeing how that potentially plays out. So it is a priority.
Of the 126 producers you have, are some of them quite small producers?
Yeah, the overwhelming majority are actually smaller producers, smaller free-range farmers. People may not be aware, but fundamentally out of that 126, about 15 actually produce about 85% of all the eggs in New Zealand. So you do have an industry of some very large players and a lot of smaller players. And we've got to be very mindful of the impacts of adding cost to those people.
And when do you expect to have an answer on that?
Look, I can't give a time because you're looking at a range of issues, but I can assure your listeners that it is important. I think this case will just encourage many people to say we as farmers, we as producers must give our consumers confidence and push this concept further along.
What is the current audit system and how does it work?
So all farms must have records on the amount of birds that they have, the amount of eggs they produce, and how much eggs are sold. One of the issues in the industry, and I understand it may have an element here, is that particularly a lot of the smaller players don't have the ability to interact at the marketing. That they'll go, I'll sell my eggs to a larger player who then has the interface with retailers, and so there's that issue of the whole marketplace selling and moving eggs around. But in this case, if an individual is determined to break the law by falsifying information for audit, any system can be subverted.
That's the Executive Director of the Egg Producers Federation, Michael Brooks, who was talking to our reporter Catherine Hutton. Palace Poultry has declined to comment. Countdown was unavailable to talk to Checkpoint today. 7 minutes to 6. District Health Boards say the deal they've reached with junior doctors over rosters isn't a good one, and they only agreed to it to prevent further strikes. Resident doctors have today ratified the deal that was hammered out between the Resident Doctors Association and the DHBs after a roster and pay dispute that prompted 2 rounds of industrial action. Of course, we've covered that at length on Checkpoint. DHBs say that they've settled reluctantly, but in their first comment on the settlement, they say it has bought 12 months peace. Our health correspondent Karen Brown reports.
The deal finally approved by both sides ensures junior doctors work no more than 10 consecutive days and no more than 4 nights in a row. The Resident Doctors Association's National Secretary, Deborah Powell, says the deal, which covers 144 acute care rosters, will make hospitals safer for doctors and patients.
It'd be fair to say we've set a standard now, a new standard as to what is acceptable in terms of rostering doctors, and if there are other rosters out there that need to meet those standards in the due course of time, they will also be getting some attention.
The safer rosters will see doctors given more weekdays off, but to get around the DHB's resistance to paying doctors for those days, they will have to repay between $110 and $120 on average for each of those weekdays off. Dr. Powell says that's not ideal, but it's good enough for now and will be looked into further during a remuneration review that will begin soon.
We are going to have a proper look at the composition of our salaries going forward and to see if we can't get a better system for RMO pay during the term of this document.
Deborah Powell says doctors didn't want a one-year deal, meaning both sides will be back in pay talks in under 12 months. The DHB's lead chief executive for Workforce and Employment Relations, Julie Patterson, says they've only signed the deal to prevent a repeat of the strikes that took place last October and in January.
Is it what the DHB's wanted to achieve? No, it's not. But we couldn't go on being threatened by strikes. You know, the DHB's agreed that we couldn't subject our communities and our other staff to any further strikes.
Julie Patterson says DHBs do not believe the agreement is going to solve fatigue problems for doctors.
However, the union thinks that this is going to help that. So, of course, we need now the 12 months of peace to work through those health and safety claims and get those new rosters in place and, importantly, get the remuneration review underway.
Mrs. Patterson maintains that many of the junior doctors don't understand some of the issues involved with revising their rosters. She would not put a figure on the cost of the deal, but says it will be high because DHBs could need to employ up to 160 more doctors to cover the new roster arrangement.
I think the overall number for the country was estimated to be around about 160. But that very much depends now on how each individual DHB manages the roster changes.
The doctors, whose average annual pay is now about $80,000, have a one-year contract. That will give both them and the DHB some breathing space before they have to hammer out another deal in a year's time. For Checkpoint, this is Karen Brown.
The diplomatic feud between Turkey and the Netherlands has deepened, with the Turkish president accusing the NATO ally of fascism after officials blocked rallies there. President Erdogan has lashed out at the Dutch government, which he says has behaved like a banana republic amid a growing row over the Turkish government's attempts to hold rallies in European countries. He's compounded the insult by claiming the Dutch government is full of Nazi remnants and fascists. And earlier today he called for global sanctions on the Netherlands, which he says will pay dearly for its actions. This report from the BBC's Mark Lowen.
Turkey's president doesn't pull back from a fight, and he's been on the warpath again today. Recep Tayyip Erdogan hit out at the Netherlands for blocking 2 Turkish ministers' visits and for sending its riot police to dispel a Turkish rally in Rotterdam. The Dutch government had told Turkish politicians not to come days before an election that's seen the rise of the far right. Repeating his accusation of Nazism and fascism, Mr. Erdogan warned the Netherlands of consequences. If you are sacrificing Turkish-Dutch relations for the sake of the election on Wednesday, you will pay the price, he said, condemning the shameless treatment of the ministers. Politics is at play on both sides. Mr. Erdogan is using the image of a Turkey oppressed by Europe to rally his nationalist supporters before a referendum next month on boosting his powers. And the Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte is standing firm to stop the far right in the Netherlands from exploiting anti-immigrant sentiment. But Mr Rutte also called for de-escalation.
We are absolutely willing to de-escalate, but of course these utterings of the President of the Turkish Republic do not help. And they are completely unacceptable, that's clear. Some Turkish politicians are talking about Nazism and fascism in relationship to the Netherlands. This country, as the mayor of Rotterdam pointed out yesterday, was bombed during the Second World War by the Nazis. It's totally unacceptable to talk in this way.
Denmark's Prime Minister has now proposed postponing a visit by his Turkish counterpart, the latest in a series of European countries anxious about Turkish electioneering abroad. Mr Erdogan may be profiting domestically, but in the process his country is in an unprecedented diplomatic crisis.
It's coming up to 6:01. Lots of feedback tonight. Lots of people really exasperated by the situation in Auckland and demanding something is done. This person says covering the whole Auckland area in concrete and building on major drainage areas will only have one result, flood damage. It's unwise to inhabit a flood plan. Lots and lots of emails, texts, etc. urging the council to do something. This about the protest that we began our program with tonight is from Glenn Small in Karori. Glenn says, John, the reaction to the indiscretions of 2 students of Wellington College is out of proportion to the event. They were off campus and on their own time. Nobody got hurt, nobody got raped. The media, including and shamefully RNZ, persist in focusing on this non-event. Why? Nobody benefits. The students and graduates of Wellington College are fine citizens and ambassadors for their schools and families. They contribute hugely to the success of Wellington and New Zealand. Please stop the media beat-up demonisation of this fine school before you encourage more rape. RNZ is making things worse. Thank you for your feedback. It's 6:00.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, I'm Paul Brennan. Hundreds of people are gathered on the lawn outside Parliament protesting against rape culture and calling for better sex education in secondary schools. The rally was planned after 2 Wellington College boys posted messages on Facebook boasting about having sex with drunk or unconscious girls. Michael Kropp reports.
Despite a rainy day in the capital, hundreds of people, including many from Wellington College, have turned out waving banners and placards and chanting anti-rape slogans. The protest was organised by students from Wellington East Girls College, Wellington Girls College and Wellington High School. In a speech to the crowd, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Women, Paula Bennett, showed solidarity with the cause and applauded the protesters' bravery. Call Michael Kropp their name.
Auckland's drainage system is being described as outdated and needing billions of dollars to get up to standard. Hundreds of people in the city's western suburbs have been cleaning up their sodden homes today following yesterday's flash floods. Infrastructure New Zealand's chief executive, Stephen Selwood, told Checkpoint part of the problem lies with having a combined stormwater and wastewater system.
When the stormwater overflows, they basically overflow into one another, which means you end up with wastewater in the stormwater system. That was the way it was designed, way back in the day when Auckland was going to only have 1 million population. We're now 1.5 million and still the same system.
Mr. Selwood says it will cost at least $15 billion over 30 years to improve the system. But the council's chief operating officer, Dean Kimpton, said last week's weather was an exceptional situation and they're sorting out the issue. Mr. Kimpton emphasised the council has to be sensible with how it budgets its money. District health boards say they signed a deal with junior doctors rather than subjecting the public to more strike action. The Resident Doctors Association said today more than 90% of junior doctors have backed a deal with their employers. It ends months of bitterness and 2 strikes at almost all public hospitals over an impasse concerning rosters and pay. In the first public comment from DHBs about the deal, which is now final, their Chief Executive for Workforce and Employment Relations, Julie Patterson, says they had little choice but to settle.
Is it what the DHBs wanted to achieve? No, it's not. But we couldn't go on being threatened by strikes. The DHBs agreed that we couldn't subject our communities and our other staff to any further strikes.
Julie Patterson there. The police say they were shot at during a car chase in South Auckland this afternoon following a robbery at a dairy. They say 3 men walked into the shop at about 2 o'clock this afternoon and ran off in a waiting car with the till. Officers spotted the getaway car in Manurewa but abandoned the chase when a shot was fired at a patrol car. The police Eagle helicopter found the car and 3 men aged 21, 26 and 29 have been arrested. The police say the officer in the car that was shot at is shaken but not injured. 4 staff were in the dairy and customers, including children. The government has rolled out the second phase of its anti-money laundering legislation, which means lawyers, accountants and real estate agents are now covered. The new legislation is intended to make it harder for criminals to profit from and fund illegal activities. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Anti-money laundering and terrorist financing laws currently apply to financial institutions only. This latest bill will cover a range of professionals and imposes tougher financial obligations on those dealing with large amounts of money. It was fast-tracked after the release of the Panama Papers last year. The Justice Minister Amy Adams says compliance costs for businesses are now estimated to be between $800 million and $1.1 billion, compared with the initial figure of $1.8 billion. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
An armed defenders squad officer shot and seriously wounded in a house siege near Kawerau in March last year says he has no recollection of who shot him. Rhys Warren is on trial in the High Court in Hamilton facing several charges, including 2 of attempted murder. 4 officers were wounded. Constable Regan Mauheni has told the court that he was standing next to another officer as they were trying to clear the house, and the next thing he remembers is lying on the floor. He received wounds to his head, face, neck and chest. Mr. Mauheni says he then required surgery and rehabilitation before being able to return to work. It's 4.5 minutes past 6. On to sport now. The Black Caps batsman Colin Munro has been suspended from Auckland's upcoming Plunket Shield cricket match for using abusive language. A statement from New Zealand Cricket says Munro was suspended at a code of conduct hearing after using inappropriate language in the match against Canterbury. The statement doesn't say whether Munro directed the abuse towards an umpire or an opposition player. The All Black 7 side remains 4th overall in the World Series despite a disappointing 5th place finish at the latest round in Vancouver. New Zealand only narrowly beat Argentina 17-14 to finish 5th after going unbeaten in pool play. They lost their quarter-final to eventual winners England, who toppled championship leaders South Africa in the tournament final. The New Zealand rally driver Hayden Paddon in his Hyundai has finished 5th in the latest round of the World Rally Championships in Mexico. Paddon finished 3.5 minutes behind the winner Chris Meek of Britain in a Citroen. It was Paddon's best finish of the 3 races so far this season. He sits 9th overall in the Drivers' Championship, which is headed by Frenchman Sébastien Ogier.
Been a difficult weekend, certainly not the performance level we wanted, and struggled with a lot of little things going on. Certainly feels like we're in a bit of a trough at the moment.
New Zealand rally driver Hayden Paddon there. And a British media report says the All Whites defender Winston Reid is set to get a pay rise that will have him earning over $120,000 a week at English Premier League club West Ham. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Love Darlin on the site where the woolly mammoth made its last stand, an Arctic island surrounded by rising seawater. Eric Brenstrom presents the current world weather, records falling all over the place, including CO2 concentrations, although not enough to concern the new head of the American EPA, apparently. And we have a window on the world of McDonald's, trying to crack the fast food market in India, on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now we have the up-to-date short forecast from Met Service taking us through to midnight tomorrow, Tuesday. Northland, cloudy periods with isolated showers. Auckland to Kapiti Coast, including the central high country, cloudy periods with a few showers. They should clear from the south tomorrow. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine breaks, but also a few showers, possibly heavy and thundery about Gisborne and Hawke's Bay this evening. Waited Upper and Wellington, scattered showers. Buller, Nelson and Marlborough, scattered showers, possibly heavy about the Nelson Ranges this evening. Showers should retreat to Kaikoura Coast in the morning. Westland and Fiordland, scattered rain, clearing from the south this evening, becoming fine there. Canterbury, rain clearing to isolated showers tomorrow morning and fine breaks developing inland. Otago and Southland, cloudy, isolated showers, fine spells developing inland tomorrow, and at the Chatham Islands, overcast with rain, easing to isolated showers in the morning tomorrow. It's nearly 6:08.
Thanks very much, Paul. Time zones, different time zones. Auckland, Wellington, it's 6:07 in Auckland, unless my clock is wrong, and it may well be. Anyway. A minute, it's a mere bagatelle between friends. Let's go out west. Angry residents in flood-hit West Auckland are demanding answers from the council in the wake of yesterday's flash floods about why the drains couldn't cope. Those affected largely in Newlyn, Glendine and Kelston began picking up the pieces this morning as engineers continue to assess sites and roads for any structural damage. We're going to talk big picture soon, but first I hope we have this report from Carla Penman. No, we don't have it, so we're going to come back to Carla Penman's report shortly. But Auckland's stormwater infrastructure is old, dated, and the product of decades of underinvestment. That is the view of Infrastructure New Zealand CEO Stephen Selwood. And when the stormwater systems can't drain fast enough, that's when we see the flooding problems that occurred at the weekend. So what's the scale of the problem and how do we fix it? I put that question to Stephen Selwood. Is Auckland's stormwater infrastructure up to the task?
No, the reality is there's decades of investment required, and this goes back a really long time, and unfortunately things can't be fixed overnight, which is the legacy we now face.
That legacy predates many current Aucklanders. In fact, there are older suburbs in Auckland using stormwater infrastructure put in a century ago. And it was a much smaller place then, of course. Bear in mind, Auckland's population didn't reach 500,000 until 1961. It's now 3 times that. And there's another legacy issue beneath the city surface.
We've got combined stormwater and wastewater systems. When the stormwater overflows, they basically overflow into one another, which means you end up with wastewater in the stormwater system. That was the way it was designed, way back in the day.
So, Auckland's legacy not only includes infrastructure for a much smaller city, it includes infrastructure in which stormwater and wastewater have combined. So, mix elderly infrastructure with heavy rain and...
At the margin, when we have heavy downfalls like that, the whole system is under pressure.
The question is, how often does that happen? The weekend's rainfall was way greater than even this rainy old city typically sees. Surely the system can handle rainfall events that aren't quite as severe.
No, not in Auckland, not at Manukau Harbour for the Mangere Wastewater Treatment Plant.
Which is the biggest water treatment plant in New Zealand, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, it's not coping with even smaller events.
That's wastewater biologist Gemma Tolich-Allen. She's scientific advisor for the Manukau Harbour Restoration Society. Yes, she says the weekend's rainfall was severe, but less rain can still tax Auckland's biggest wastewater treatment plant. Mangere can cope with an inflow of 9 cubic litres a second. So the obvious question, how often a year, in a typical kind of year, does it get more than 9 litres per second?
Around 20 to 22 events per year.
And an event is what? Is that what? 1 minute, 1 day, 1 hour? What is that?
An event, Watercare terms an event any period of sustained bypass. So that could be as short as, say, 2 to 3 hours, or it could go as long as sort of 30, 35 hours. So it can cover more than 1 day.
Right, and that's happening 20 to 22 times a year?
Yes, yeah.
Really? Clearly that's way more often than the kind of rainfall events we saw over the weekend. Can you actually cite periods in which this has happened?
For example, in June 2015, from June to August 2015, which was a 3-month period, we have figures supplied to us from Watercare that show that there were 6 primary bypasses. That means that the solid component in the flow coming into the treatment plant, which includes all the fecal matter, wasn't settled for 6 events over that period, and some of them were as large as over 140 Olympic-sized swimming pools.
In other words, the plant, which is Auckland's largest, couldn't cope and wasn't able to do the treatment job it exists to do. And that was with lower rainfall than we've just seen. Now, we don't yet know how much fecal material bypassed normal treatment in the city's weekend deluge.
They won't be able to give you figures probably immediately, but over the coming weeks, you'll be able to work out just the volume of waste that has gone into the Manukau over this event, and I think it will just absolutely shock Auckland.
The other shock may be fiscal rather than fecal. To fix the deficiencies of stormwater and wastewater systems in order to get Auckland's water infrastructure up to scratch for Auckland now rather than Auckland way back then, how much will that cost? Let's ask Stephen Selwood. Realistically, how much money is going to have to be spent? Ballpark figure, obviously.
Look, I would, we're talking sort of 15, 20 billion over a 30-year period. It's a big number. And immediately within the next decade, I know that Watercare have in excess of $5 billion worth of capital works planned. And of course, the other thing is it's not only a money issue, it's getting consents for the work to be done. For example, Watercare have a proposal for a new treatment plant out west in Oratia. They originally had consents in a forestry area. That was now withdrawn by the planning hearings process, and so they're in consultation with the local community. And these sorts of processes can take months, if not years, to resolve. And all of that's adding to the pressure.
Stephen Selwood, the CEO of Infrastructure New Zealand. Let's go to Auckland's Mayor now, Phil Goff, who's been out west surveying the damage caused by yesterday. In fact, the weekend's flash floods, 65 millimetres of rain in just an hour in the suburb of Newland Glendine around there. Mayor Goff, are you there?
Yeah, g'day, John. I'm just at one of the big apartment blocks at the moment. There's all the cars in the car park. Most of them, the water went right over the top. This is, it's not a flash block of flats, people generally on pretty low incomes, and the cost to those people is just enormous in terms of the damage to their vehicles, the loss of their possessions. We've just been in another house, a Tongan family, young family, 2 and 3 year old child. They were at church, they came home just in the clothes that they were wearing. They've lost everything.
And sorry, forgive me, but are they renting?
They're renting.
And they have no insurance?
No insurance, and equally I've been to some of the small businesses in New Lynn, people that are working really hard, but they're not, they don't have much freeboard in their income, and so often they're not insured, because, that's one of the things that goes when you're struggling to meet the cost of living. But I suppose the positive thing is the response that we're getting. Civil defence, we've got 27 families that we've housed here. We're working with the Sallies to replace children's clothing, whiteware, the sort of stuff all the furniture that they've lost. Helping people with hot cards so that they can get to work when, they've lost their car in it. So there's bits and pieces that we can do at a human level, and the community is rallying around those folk, and that's, I suppose, the bright spot in what is otherwise a really sad situation. For
absolutely.
Lost so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And everyone knows that the rainfall we saw over the weekend was just extraordinary, even by the standards of Auckland, where we all know we can get a lot of rain. But there have been places, Glendine, for example, where the flooding has occurred twice in 5 years, same drain, same properties flooded. At what stage does the council say we can do better at getting this water away from properties?
It's a good question. I'm at that very property now that flooded back in 2012. And what happened at that time was that the culvert had collapsed, and that had caused the blockage. We're still to find out. We should know in the next day or so what the cause of the blockage was. Sometimes it's because there's a grill across the culvert, and when you get a deluge, a water bomb, what it does is it washes everything from upstream, and then it clogs the grill. You've got to have the grill in place, because otherwise kids would get into the culvert and lives would be at risk. But, it's the same as the fences on the farm, basically. All of the stuff upstream in the creeks washes down, and you see, up to the sixth wire on the fence, you see the debris jammed against the fence, which in turn acts as a dam. And that's what's happened in a number of these places. So we've got to make an assessment. Is there an argument for improving the diameter of the culvert and redoing the entire culvert? Quite expensive, but it may be warranted. We'd have to work on engineering advice. Or do you simply accept that from time to time you're going to have these problems when you have that level of rainfall, happens across the country?
Absolutely. I wonder, though, if we accept that we need to tell the residents. I mean, the point you're making, and it's a good one, and it was an empathetic and decent point to make, is that these are people who can't afford to lose what they've lost. And these are people who are living in these communities because they are low-rent communities and they are low-income families. Don't we need to tell them that there is a disproportionate likelihood of flooding and loss when it rains heavily where they are?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And I'm looking at this block of flats. There's a hell of a lot of them. Used to be a motel. Twice in 5 years.
Yeah.
We need to work out whether if there is not an engineering solution to stopping these events happening periodically, whether you continue the consent to have the building in place.
Okay, so do we have to have an explicit process around this? I mean, I don't want to reflect. I don't want to sound cynical about the landlord here, but my overwhelming sense is that they are not going to be saying to prospective tenants, "Hey, look, there's a high flood risk here." Who's going to tell them?
Yeah, and people deserve to have that warning. And the truth is, even with that warning, because of those that are on the lowest incomes in our community, they're going to be forced to live in the places that are cheapest, and the places that are cheapest are often the places that are at most risk.
Yeah.
So there are some big questions there that I think we have to ask. If this place has suffered twice within 5 years to this degree of damage, do we say, look, this is no longer an appropriate place to have rented out to people? It is at risk. If we can't do anything to mitigate against that risk, do you continue to allow habitation of the block of flats? And that's a question that I think council officials are going to have to ask themselves.
Great. Okay, well, we look forward to the answer on that. Can we move from the micro to the macro? And that is the really big picture, and that's the stuff that Stephen Selwood from Infrastructure New Zealand was talking about, and Gemma Tolich-Allen, who is a wastewater biologist, saying, look, there is so much pressure now on what in parts of the city is really ageing infrastructure that serious money needs to be spent. Are you going to spend it as mayor?
Well, the question is, you've got to have the money to spend, and our challenge in Auckland at a time when we're growing by 45,000 people a year is that we are constrained by a debt-to-revenue ratio that says that if we exceed 265% debt to revenue, we lose our credit rating, which is a high credit rating. That loses its access to credit, and it makes credit that much more
all of that's a fair point, but this is also a discussion of priorities, isn't it? I mean, for example, the Waterfront Stadium is being mooted at the moment. What do you spend your money on? And the problem is that below ground stuff doesn't get you votes. No one sees it. It's never going to, there's never going to be a pipe. There's never going to be a stormwater pipe with a plaque saying "Opened by Phil Goff" on it. At what stage do you have to make a choice between the above ground stuff and the below ground stuff, which is now starting to hold the city hostage, isn't it?
Yeah, you've got to get your priorities right. We know that we've got to replace Eden Park in 15 years' time. $250 million need to be spent on it. We've got to keep the options open for what we might replace it with. But the absolute priority is the fundamental services. It's the roading in a city that's becoming more and more affected by congestion and, in fact, gridlock. It's the pressure on wastewater. I mean, that's not new. It's been around since 1913 with the failure to separate stormwater from wastewater. We're working on that. There's close to $1 billion being spent on that in the next couple of years that will largely resolve that problem. But it's the problem, of water supply too. This might have been an unprecedented event for water care, but it's a sad reflection in a first world city.
Yeah.
If you are at risk of having to put a boil water order out. Now, we're not at that point yet, and the savings that Aucklanders are making will hopefully prevent that from happening. But we're faced with a situation. We've got climate change. We've got an increase in the number of extreme events. People might say, well, it's only a 1 in 100 event, but we don't know that this isn't going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah.
We've got the extra population, which puts more demand on your water supply, which cuts down the headroom that you've got for when your major water treatment station that treats 2/3 of the water in Auckland gets affected by siltation and it halves its capacity, then we're under pressure. So we're going to have to address that as a priority, because a decent, clean, safe water supply is your priority for a city. We as Aucklanders will not put up with a situation where that might be at risk.
Yep.
Now, there's a whole range of solutions I've been talking to Water Care about. Why are the dams becoming so silted? Well, partly it's because in the past Water Care let the land out around it for commercial forestry, and when you cut trees down, you make the land vulnerable to siltation. Now, Water Care made the decision, ironically, 6 weeks ago, that they would stop commercial logging and that they would replant in Indigenous forestry. And if that decision had been made 20 years ago, we wouldn't have had the problem with the siltation that we had.
Look, there's so much to talk about here. And what we're going to do over the next few days is look at this in depth, and we are going to talk to Watercare about all of these matters, and we're also going to try and work out how much it is going to cost to get this under the ground infrastructure sorted. Thank you for your time tonight. We really appreciate it. Gosh, this is a big issue, and it's not only in Auckland. The festival vendor says people were unprepared and lives were put at risk by the decision not to cancel 3 days of a music and arts festival in Waihi over the weekend. Coromandel, about 200 people were evacuated from the event in the early hours of Saturday morning, with some festival campers finding themselves waist deep in water. Joe O'Brien reports.
The 3-day Sundays festival at Dicky Flat in Waitawhita opened on Friday with the promise of an extravaganza of music and art. But later that night, the banks of the river behind the event split, creating torrents around the stages and campsites. Festival organisers say that prompted them to order the evacuation of some punters at about 10:30. But food vendor and artist Lyndall Jeffries says the call came too late.
They're incredibly lucky that at this stage it looks like there's been no loss of life. You know, a guy was in his caravan which started getting swept away, and he got out of it into 5-foot deep water.
Festival lighting installer Andrea Gaia also got into difficulties when she went back to her tent following the evacuation order.
The water was sort of up around my waist, and my boots had filled up with mud, and I got a bit of a suction thing happening, and I got a bit stuck. But there was some people on the other side of the bank that formed a little human chain that came in and pulled me out, which was good. And it wasn't too dramatic, but it was, I guess, at the time a little bit scary.
Lyndall Jeffries says the power of the water made it incredibly dangerous, and the festival should have been cancelled or postponed. She says the festival goers were unprepared and there should have been a clearer evacuation plan.
You had festival goers with no raincoats, no gumboots, no dry warm clothes. You had people carrying children with no raincoats, with no umbrellas, just bare feet, shirtless people walking up away from the site.
But Andrea Gaia says they were well taken care of once they made it to safety.
It was dark, and you know, you've got water swirling around you. You don't quite know what's going on. There was a lot of people there supporting and helping people across, and they set up a rescue centre on the other side of the river in the shed up the top with blankets and hot food and spare clothes for everybody.
And Andrea Gaia has sympathy for the organisers.
They're pretty sensible people, and they were keeping a very big eye on the weather, and there was a little bit of letting us know that there was a contingency plan should the weather shift and change and go to the south. It was looking like at the time that it was going to go around us.
Hauraki Civil Defence assisted with the evacuation, and the police and army were also called in to get festival goers out by bus, with about 60 people evacuated to Waihi. Hauraki District Council Chief Executive Langley Cavers says Civil Defence reports the evacuation was chaotic, and they're disappointed the festival went ahead on Friday given the weather conditions and warnings.
There was potential for a threat to human safety as a result of the wet weather and the flooding that occurred. You know, I've had reports the water was going through cars and vans and the like, and it doesn't take much water in the middle of the night to propose a reasonable risk.
The Sunday's festival organisers have yet to respond to requests for comment. For Checkpoint, ko Joe O'Brien tēnei.
6:26 earlier in the program. In fact, we were just talking about it with Phil Goff. We brought you the story of the Janaja family in Glendine. Their unit was flooded on Sunday in that flash flood, and they lost everything. They don't have insurance. The owner of the property, Philip Davis, has just got in touch. He says he was not aware the property was a flood risk. He says the 2012 flooding was as a result of a blockage in the stormwater pipe, not a failure to cope with torrential rain, and he was not aware the pipe was, and I quote, a known hotspot. That's what the council's calling it. Mr Davis says he will warn all future tenants of the flood risk. Thank you for that from Philip Davis. 6:27. The government is lagging well behind on its own targets to reduce violent crime. Well behind. The target is one of 11 better public service targets set by the former Prime Minister John Campbell in 2012. They include reducing violent They include reducing welfare dependency and violent offending and increasing immunisation rates and early childhood education attendance. One of the most challenging targets for the government to meet will be in reducing violent crime. The target to reduce violent crime set at 20% by June 2017. To date, the reduction is 2%. The Prime Minister, Bill English, says it's always disappointing to not hit a target.
But we've seen crime generally come down and go up again, and you're seeing the signs of those increases, particularly with the serious crime around the prison numbers, which are rising. I think it is one of our more challenging public sector targets, because it's a bit hard to understand. Well, we're working quite hard to understand what's actually going on there.
Mr English, is there a number of recently announced initiatives which will affect the violent crime statistics?
Some of which will mean the prosecution of more violent crime. So the expansion of police over the next 4 years, over 1,200 new staff, that gets underway pretty shortly, and we've budgeted for them catching more people for violent crime. And the other significant change has been the strong focus on family violence. So the legislation that will be introduced this week will almost certainly lead to the prosecution of more family violence with tougher sentences for it. So that's going to tend to push your violent crime figures up, at least for a while.
Bill English, the government will announce new public targets later this year. 6:29 exactly. We read an email just before 6, and it certainly has encouraged a great deal of response. This is a good sample of it. Oh my goodness, that last email you read out before the news regarding Wellington College boys and their Facebook posts, that person asked the media to stop giving these kids a hard time and says that they've not hurt anybody. I'm a young woman in my 20s and I find that attitude a little sad. I agree the media can sometimes be guilty of exacerbating problems. However, in this case, I think it was absolutely necessary to put pressure on these kids and bring out in the open these archaic opinions that some, not all, young men have. These boys are going to be old enough to vote, possibly in this year of school, Year 13 students. Do they not want to be considered adult? Harbouring those attitudes and hiding behind Facebook, gathering a dubious crew behind them liking their posts is not healthy for anyone. It's argued that this is typical schoolboy behaviour, but I and lots of my social group are just a little bit sick of it all. I think it's good that it's been highlighted in the media, as do a lot of people. I do not say shame on the media. I say shame on these silly boys and those people who want to hide it all away. And that is Checkpoint for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow at 5. Thank you for joining us.
RNZ News headlines now at 6:30. Hundreds of people gathered on the lawn outside Parliament protesting against rape culture and calling for better sex education in secondary schools. The Auckland Council says it's working to fix its drainage system after criticism it's out of date and requires billions of dollars to get it up to standard. DHB say they signed a deal with junior doctors rather than subjecting the public to more strike action, and the police say they were shot at during a car chase in South Auckland following a robbery at a dairy. Those are our headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
There's some shiny new gems in me treasure chest. Let's take a look. What? There's dogs in me treasure chest, by gum. Who are they?
Muffin McClure.